is that it's a very small carbon tax. This is actually much smaller than what pretty much any expert says is necessary to put us on a path towards really addressing the climate crisis and towards shifting to a renewable energy economy. This is already a compromised bill, and I think it's important to take this first step and to begin walking down this path, but it's also important to acknowledge that this is a compromise from the beginning, and you certainly shouldn't back up from this point, and that any opportunity that there is in the future to strengthen that bill should be taken. And so one of the first things that I would like to recommend is that this carbon price needs to increase every year. Ideally at $10 a year, every year, to really create the kind of economic shift that we need to address the climate crisis. So that's my first recommendation, that it needs to increase every year, and that it should be written into the bill to have a standard increase, but also to be open to look at the way that we are trying to change our carbon emissions in this state, to be able to measure that on a regular basis and revisit whether this carbon tax needs to be increased and strengthened in order to get us on the trajectory that we need to be on. So I'd encourage the state to do that. And even though that it is still a moderate tax, the REMI study has said that the climate impacts of this, the emissions impacts of this, would still be significantly greater than the economic impacts of this. And Mr. Chairman, you were wondering why that is, that, or if that's really true, that only a half a percentage point in jobs is actually significant. I would like to suggest that part of the reason why this bill has a much larger impact on our emissions than it does on our economy is that politicians in this state and around the country have put a lot of effort for a very long time into addressing our economy and into creating jobs, into addressing unemployment. That's something that a lot of politicians put a lot of effort into, and our public systems put a lot of resources into that. And you haven't done the same on climate change. Our politicians in this country are way behind the curve. You are overdue for this kind of bill in this state and around the country. And some of the critics tonight have pointed out that no other state in the country has done this. But having plenty of company on the wrong side of history does not excuse you from still being on the wrong side of history. And even though no other state has done this, you need to be the first ones. When you're explaining to your children why you didn't act when you knew about the serious threat of climate change, they will not excuse you because you said others didn't act first. You are in a position of power and you have a responsibility to use it. And certainly that can set the stage for the rest of the country acting and can show leaders in Washington that the states and the people are ready to accept what's necessary to put us on a path towards a livable climate. And the other thing I would like to recommend about this bill is that 25% that is going towards the climate resilience and energy efficiency fund, I think that needs to be increased. I think that needs to be a bigger share of where these funds go, especially with low levels of returns on this moderate carbon tax. The idea that the majority of folks in this state are going to save up those $100 or $60 checks every year in order to make some big changes to their personal infrastructure, or the businesses are going to do that with their moderate checks is not really very realistic. I think we do need to pull public resources to do that. And the other reason that I think that needs to be a bigger part of this is that when I say that you're overdue on this, I mean that literally. Like being overdue on a credit card, there are penalties that you will reap, and that our state will reap, and that everyone will reap, because you are so late on this. And it's too late for us to stop climate change at 1.5 C. It's almost certainly too late for us to stop it at 2 degrees C. And for a state like Rhode Island, that means we're going to be suffering major impacts. And we're going to need to start building up the resources for adaptation. And those costs are going to get higher for this state every year. And so we need to create the kind of resources that can meet those needs that increase every year.
Thank you. Any questions?